Well, as a 17-year-old young man, Nate Hassis left the football field on Saturday, October 25th, 2003, the senior quarterback of Springfield Southeast High School. And he was absolutely thrilled. In the last game of the season, his team beat Cahokia High 42-20. Well, with seconds to go in the last game of his high school career, he completed a 37-yard pass. The completion actually gave Hassis 5,006 yards for his career, setting a new record for the Central State 8 Conference, and made him one of 12 Illinois high school quarterbacks to pass for more than 5,000 yards. But a post-game press conference with both coaches later confirmed that not everything was as it appeared. With less than a minute to go in the game, Hassis was 29 yards short of the record. And since the opposing team had the ball, Springfield's coach realized that the only way that Nate would have a chance of passing the record or getting the record is he's got to get the ball back. So calling timeout, Coach Taylor confirmed with Cahokia's coach and secretly devised a plan. Springfield Southeast would let Cahokia score an uncontested touchdown. Nate's team would get the ball back with about 1 minute left to go for one last drive. The agreement was when Nate attempted to pass, the Cahokia defenders would not interfere. And that's exactly what happened. Well, a few days later, Nate wrote a letter to the president of the athletic conference asking that the pass actually be stricken from the record books. In his letter, he wrote, "While I admittedly would like to have had and passed the record, as any high school quarterback would have, I'm requesting that the Central State 8 actually disallow the pass for the record books." Man, what a classy young man. Well, the honor student told the Associated Press reporter that I just didn't feel right, he said, having the record. I wanted to preserve the integrity as well as the sportsmanship of the game. And we need more adults to act like that, don't we, in our world? Well, today, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about ethics. We're not talking about football, but we're talking about ethics and morals and values and principles and Christian character in the workplace. And I want to share 3 specific ways that we can have ethics and values and keep our Christian character intact. The first thing that we need to do is we got to be careful because it is a jungle out there when it comes to ethics and morals and values. There are all kinds of ways for us as Christians, as God-fearing people, as Jesus followers, to get hung up in the workplace when it comes to morals and values. I wonder how many Christians were actually interviewed in the Reader's Digest survey. They interviewed 3,000 people and asked some questions, and this is what they discovered. 63% had called in sick at work when not ill. Now, I could ask you to raise your hands if you've ever done that, but I'm not going to put you on the spot. 63% had taken office supplies from their company for personal use. 50% had been undercharged. They received too much money back from the cashier, but they didn't say anything. 37% had downloaded music from the internet without paying for it. 32% had lied to their spouse about the cost of a recent purchase. Lunch is going to be pretty interesting today with your spouse. We got some things to talk about there. 16% had taken something of value from their company for personal use. 18% had misstated facts on a resume or a job application. 13% had shifted blame to a coworker for something they themselves did. 17% had cheated on their tax return, not declaring all the income or over-reporting deductions. 12% had switched price tags to get a lower price for something that they were going to buy. Man, is the $1.25 really worth that? I don't know. I don't think so. We have all faced ethical battles. Some of them are small, some of them not so small in the workplace. The moment can sneak up on us without much notice. A decision has to be made. And all of a sudden we found ourselves, because of what usually comes out of our mouth or because of what our hands or our feet have done, we find ourselves on the opposite side of integrity. And often, instead of just coming clean, we make matters worse and we double down. And then when things get even hotter, we double down again, and we double down again until we are living in a trash can full of mess, and that is not where we were created and designed to live. James, the book of James, has some very practical advice for us, and James's counsel comes to mind, and this would be most helpful for us to implement when we are in that situation of whether or not we're going to have ethics and morals and values and our integrity or not. James 1:19 says this, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." Now, being slow to speak can actually help us to be careful in the jungle. What does it mean to be slow to speak? Being slow to speak means we have to increase the distance between this up here and the end of our tongue. We've got to increase that distance because oftentimes we get ready and we say something before we've really thought through it. And so if we're going to navigate the jungle of ethics in the workplace, we have to be slow to speak. That will be very, very helpful. But the other thing that we need to do, besides being careful and being prepared, is we have to understand that we have some options. We do have some options in the workplace. There are several ways that a person can deal with an unethical situation. One of those ways, I want to share 4 of those. One of those ways is you can sell out. That's people do it all the time. I mean, it's not your problem. You didn't create the problem. It's your boss's problem. It's your company's problem. I mean, they created the issue, not you, and you're only doing your job, right? Well, wrong. To take that approach to sell out and just join the crowd of, unethical activities it goes against the whole principle that's involved in us taking care of business in this whole work series. Especially when we talk about things like we did the last 2 weeks, working for God with all of our heart, doing everything that we are doing as working for Him, not for men. Working for the master, not the boss. So we can't take that unethical approach. So we don't want to sell out. It is an option, but we don't want to do that. Our job is a part of who we are. It is actually a reflection of who we really are. And God doesn't want us to think about our jobs as something separate from our spiritual lives. It's not something that's separate from what happens in church on Sunday. Monday through Saturday has no impact on Sunday. That's not true. And if Sunday doesn't have any impact on us Monday through Saturday, that shouldn't be the way that we live our lives. God expects that our vocation to be in our career and our calling, that should be a form of worship to Him. And so what happens on Sunday when we get together, it should impact what's happening Monday through Saturday. And what's happening on Sunday is actually an overflow of what's been happening during the week when we finally get a chance to get together. So yes, we could sell out. That's one option. Another option is that we could positively compromise. Now, what I mean by compromise is I'm not talking about compromising your convictions. I'm not talking about compromising God's word. Okay, we don't do that. We don't offer those suggestions. What I'm talking about is finding ways to balance what you're doing with what you have to put up with. Can you do more good by staying in that environment and working through it than staying will harm you? Can you maintain a positive witness, or is it going to eventually erode your witness to where people aren't going to be able to tell that you're a Christian compared to everybody else? Is what you have to deal with a direct reflection upon you and your witness, or is it really simply a reflection of things that you don't have any control over? Can you be a good influence even though you have to put up with some things that you feel aren't really as right as they should be? Can you find ways to positively compromise? A third way is you may need to negotiate. This is about continuing to work in an imperfect system, but starting a dialogue with your office managers, the office administrator, the person who's in charge of you, your supervisor, and trying to avoid personal involvement in wrongdoing. Are there options available to you that you haven't heard from anybody else, or that maybe your boss hasn't heard from anybody else, that you might be able to apply some wisdom to this particular situation? Is there a creative way to avoid wrongdoing and still keep your job? And in many ways, maybe even do your job better and show that there's a better way of doing things. So you could, sell out. You could compromise. You could negotiate. The fourth thing that you could do is you could just quit. Now, this is not the first option. This is not where we start. But it is an option. We're encouraged by God's word to find ways to positively influence the world around us, even when it creates difficulty for us. Sometimes the best thing that we can do as a Christian is we're in a non-Christian environment. That's where the light needs to shine, is in that dark place. So can we salvage the world around us and not just turn it off, not just tune it out? Now, the Christian community has tuned out a lot of the world around us to our own neglect and defeat and weaknesses sometimes that exist in the world. Take, for instance, in the political world. So oftentimes, we just run the opposite way. We need Christians involved in politics. We need Christians involved in every aspect of life around us. And now, in the past, we've surrendered much of that territory, and that's not really where we should start. We can't keep surrendering parts of our world to those that are void of morals, void of a compass that points to Christ with values and convictions. How are people going to know in your place where you work, how are non-Christians going to know about Christ if you decide to leave? Now, having said all that, there are times when our best efforts aren't going to change the way things are going. For our own mental health, for our own vocational aspects of our lives, for our own emotional and spiritual lives, we have to leave. And when you've tried all else, you may need to get to that conclusion and change your job, but you don't start there. And if this is the conclusion that you come to, that I have to change jobs, do so in a way that would honor Christ. What do I mean by that? Well, give proper notice. Work faithfully to the end. Leave the door for communication open. Don't burn your bridges. Do things in a way that would honor Christ. Who knows, the Lord may use your absence, you leaving, to actually create and stir something in someone else who's left behind. Think about Daniel in the Old Testament for a minute. Now, Daniel gives us a great example all throughout the book, but in chapter 1, Daniel and his friends, they have been removed from their homes. They have been taken from Jerusalem and deported and exiled into Babylon. Now, your job is not the same thing as being carried away into slavery. Well, maybe sometimes it might feel that it is exactly the same, but there are some similarities between Daniel and our work life. When the pressure starts mounting, we get this pressure to do what's right or what's wrong. And Daniel and his friends, they had pressure to eat from the king's table. As one of the counselors that the king was educating these young Jewish men to understand the Babylonian ways, they were able to eat at the king's table. But the problem is that this king's table, small k, violated the big king's table with a large K, capital K, because God had already explained in the law of Moses what the Jewish people could eat and what they had to avoid. And so Daniel was conscience-stricken, and his first move was to try to negotiate. And so he called the captain that was in charge, and he tried to negotiate with him, but it didn't go very well. In fact, the official was not willing to take a chance on something that would actually cost his job or maybe his life. There are times in our work lives when our superior may not be willing to take a risk for us. There have been times in my work life I have not taken a risk for some of the people that have worked for me because maybe the idea was just dumb. I'm sorry, but it was just a dumb idea. It would have cost too much. It would have been too risky. We would have lost too much for that. But there's times in your life when maybe your supervisor just doesn't want to take a risk for you because their reputation will be on the line. But Daniel didn't stop with the first setback. He sought out another possibility. He realized that the words from this captain had to do with the real issue was an outward appearance. It had to do with results driven. And in our businesses, in our place of work, that's very similar to the issues that we face. Sometimes it's all about outward appearance. Sometimes it's about, results driven. So moving down the chain of command, Daniel actually found a commander who would actually listen to him. And he was able to negotiate with him. And there was this period of trial that Daniel and his associates would eat Jewish-based food and avoid the king's food. And as it turned out, that when the test was done, Daniel and his friends actually were in better health than the other king's men. Now, there's always a risk when we negotiate. There's always a risk to compromise, but many times it's worth it to keep your job if you can keep your values intact. So, yes, we got to be prepared. We've got to be ready because there's a jungle out there, but we also need to understand the options that we have. The third thing that we can do is we can commit to being ethical. Now, you may ask yourself some questions. Everybody at my workplace is not ethical. They're always, doing things that are wrong. They're always getting caught, with lack of morals and values. What's in it for me? If I'm the only one, what's in it for me? Why should I remain ethical? Well, I'm going to answer that question. There is no substitute for a clear conscience. There's absolutely no substitute. If you lose your clear conscience, you can actually end up impacting your fellowship with God. You're not going to be able to enjoy God's presence when you've got a guilty conscience. When you were a kid, just remember back, when you were a kid, when you knew you did something wrong, and you had to come to the dinner table, you avoided your parents as long as you could. But at that dinner table, you wanted to see whether or not your dad knew. And so you were a little uncomfortable. You were wiggling in your seat. Well, the same is true when it comes to God. When we've done what is wrong, when we have sinned, we usually try to avoid fellowship with God, and He's the one we so desperately need in our lives. If we lose our clear conscience, it can impact our faith, almost to the point where we could lose our faith. A guilty conscience and a strong faith, they don't go hand in hand. So we have to put the matter right, and when we put the matter right, our faith is restored. But if we give up a clear conscience, it can also impact our prayer life. A man who came to Christ was prompted by the Holy Spirit, and every time the man prayed, he remembered as a boy that he stole a bag of nails. And so every time he prayed, he just remembered this bag of nails. Well, only when he went back to the store and set it right was he able to continue to develop his prayer life. So it can impact our prayer life as well, not having a clear conscience. But if we lose our clear conscience, we could also lose our desire for God's word. And that would be an awful thing to do. Sometimes when we don't have a clear conscience, we lose our appetite for natural food. How much more for spiritual food? And also, if we lose our clear conscience, we can lose our witness. And that's why we are the light, to share. Jesus told us to go out into all the world and to witness and to evangelize and to share this light with the world around us. We don't want to lose our witness by being unethical. So why should we remain ethical? To have a clear conscience. But also we remain ethical so we don't get caught. Remember, if you're not involved in unethical activities at your workplace, you have no fear of ever getting caught and one day those activities being exposed. You don't have to worry about your boss finding out. You don't have to worry about your coworker turning you in. You don't have to worry about losing a client because of unethical practices. You can't get caught at something that you're not doing. But also, we want to be the person that people trust. Now listen, I've always told you, you can ask me anything, but I will tell you the truth, as much of the truth as I possibly can tell you. So be sure you want to ask me the question, okay? But if I say it, it's truthful. We want to be the person that is the person who tells the truth and be the person that people trust. And when we are involved in unethical activity, usually one day that information is shown, it is discovered, and then that trust is broken. And sometimes that trust can never be repaired. Sometimes it only lasts for a period of time, but sometimes it's a lifetime of distrust. And the only way to protect the trust factor is to do only those things that are trustworthy. Ethics also builds up our people relationships and our friendships. And the most valuable resource that we have is our relationships. Elliot often tells us from time to time that the thing that's going to matter 100 years from now is our relationship with Jesus. And, on our deathbed, we're not going to be thinking about, I should have spent more time at work. We're going to think about the relationships that we have. And so if we act unethically, we're going to ruin our relationships. All unethical activity hurts someone. So ethical practices will ensure that we won't destroy those things that are most important to us. And finally, your body is going to love you for keeping a clear conscience and acting ethically. So oftentimes, and our doctors are here today, they can tell us that the stress and the pressure and the strain from work creates and causes all kinds of illnesses and sicknesses and diseases. And when we act unethically, that just piles on to that pressure and that stress in our life. So doing what is right is so important. Your body will thank you for it as well. The chances and the opportunities are everywhere. They come in all shapes and sizes, big, small, little ones, to do the right thing or the wrong thing. And sometimes the pressure is almost unbearable. But the prize for doing what is right is hearing those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." You know, when you volunteer around here and on the landscaping team, and you're beautifying the property that God gave us, you know, at the end of your life, after spending hours and hours here doing that, I want to encourage you to do that, to hear those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." So many hours have been spent making dinner on Wednesday night. But Scott doesn't do that so that he hears the accolades of men. He does that so that he can one day hear the words, "Well done." You know what? I never ate a plate of food, but I was there and I saw all those people who did, and they absolutely loved it. You know, so I could go around the room and just point to all the service opportunities that people have done and the time that they've spent, whether it's doing communion or serving at a hospital or volunteering after the service is over and everyone else leaves. Alice is one of the ones who is back here cleaning the communion supplies. And we've had people that have volunteered very quietly and done things anonymously that they don't want anybody like the preacher to expose them on Sunday morning. But we've had people do things and to do the extra things through life. Why do people do that? It is not to get on the preacher's good side. It's because they want to hear those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Why does someone like Lori Hara spend decades, generations teaching junior and senior high kids? Because she too wants to hear those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Why does someone like Tiff Stott take pictures on Mother's Day or, you know, pictures with Santa and spend time organizing those to hear those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant"? Why Bill and Elaine Shump, why they spend so much time in the ministries of the church, serving on special occasions and getting the cotton candy machine and, you know, spending years in the finance ministry and our elders. Why do we do this, what we do? It is to hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And at the end of the day, isn't that why we serve as Christians? We want God to get the credit. We want Him to be glorified. Why do we give up a possibility to earn a lot of money and work for the camp, you know, and have the opportunity to spend time and to live in Keystone Heights and drive 45 minutes, an hour to a church? Why do we do that? Because it makes a difference in the lives of so many. Are our bank account going to get rich from that? No. But our spiritual bank account is full because we can see what God is doing in the lives of so many. So whatever you do, I mean, I see the Moody's here. They spent so much time in the women's ministry, not Dan, but Vicky, in the women's ministry. But after church is over, they're part of our counting team that takes care of our finances, and they have integrity, and you can trust our team to do that. And you know, I look out and I see so many that have volunteered their times. From my words, I thank you for that, but I don't want you to do it for my thanks. I don't even want you to do it for the thanks of the congregation. I want you to do it because one of these days, I promise you, remain faithful and you will hear the words, "Well done." Man, that was just great. I was there, I watched. I saw the difference that you made. Thank you. Thank you for your service. No one else saw it, but I did. Well done, good and faithful servant. That is taking care of business.